A broken cowboy wandered into her bakery seeking biscuits, but found the woman who would heal his shattered soul.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The morning sun painted the small town of Dry Creek in shades of gold and amber. Dust devils danced lazily down the main street, past the general store, the saloon, and the little bakery that had become the heart of this forgotten corner of Wyoming. Eliza Mae Turner wiped flour from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a white streak across her sun-kissed skin. She had been awake since before dawn, kneading dough, stoking the oven, creating the only sweetness this hard land had to offer. At 24, she was considered a spinster by the town's standards. Her father had passed 2 winters ago, leaving her the bakery and a mountain of debt. The women whispered that she would never find a husband now, not with flour permanently embedded under her fingernails and the smell of yeast clinging to her hair. But Eliza did not care for their whispers. She had bread to bake and a life to live. The bell above her door chimed, and she looked up from the counter where she was sprinkling sugar over fresh apple tarts. He stood in the doorway like a man who had walked straight out of the wilderness, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled beneath a weathered hat. His jaw was shadowed with days of growth, and his blue eyes held the kind of weariness that spoke of long trails and longer nights. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep, rough like gravel beneath wagon wheels. "Bar, sir," she replied, straightening her apron. "What can I get for you this morning?" The cowboy stepped inside, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He glanced around the small shop as if memorizing every detail. The jars of preserves on the shelves, the baskets of bread, the way the light fell through the dusty windows. "I heard tell this place had the best biscuits west of the Mississippi," he said. Eliza felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I cannot speak to everywhere west of the Mississippi, but I do make a fair biscuit." "A fair biscuit," he repeated, and something like amusement flickered in those tired eyes. "I will take a dozen then, and whatever else you recommend for a man who has not eaten proper in 3 days." She gathered a basket and began filling it. Biscuits still warm from the oven, a slice of honey cake, 2 apple tarts, and a small jar of her mother's strawberry preserves. She worked quickly, efficiently, aware of his gaze following her movements. "You running from something or toward something?" she asked without looking up. The cowboy was silent for a long moment. "Does it matter? It might." She met his eyes then, steady and unafraid. "This town does not take kindly to trouble." "No trouble, ma'am, just a man looking for work and a place to rest his bones." She handed him the basket. "The Carson Ranch is hiring, 3 miles east, past the creek. Tell them Eliza sent you and they will give you a fair hearing." "Eliza," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, softer, somehow sacred. "I am much obliged. That will be 75 cents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $1 coin, pressing it into her palm. His fingers brushed hers, and she felt the roughness of his calluses, the warmth of his skin. "Keep the rest," he said, "for the kindness." Before she could protest, he was gone, the bell chiming his departure. His name was Samuel Reed, and he came back the next day, and the day after that. Within a week, the whole town knew that the new hand at the Carson Ranch had taken to visiting the bakery every morning before sunrise. They whispered about it in the mercantile and speculated about it in the church pews. Eliza ignored them all. She found herself waking earlier, making extra pastries, saving the best pieces for a man whose smile came slowly but meant everything when it arrived. On the 8th day, Samuel stayed longer than usual. He sat at the small table by the window, eating his breakfast while she worked. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. Eliza punched down a ball of dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "Every day. What stops you?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands still buried in the soft, yielding dough. "My mother is buried here, my father too. This bakery is all I have left of them. If I leave, who will remember they existed?" Samuel set down his biscuit. "Memories do not live in places, Eliza. They live in people. That is a fine thing to say for a man with no roots. He flinched, and she immediately regretted her words. I had roots once, he said quietly. A farm in Kansas, a wife, a daughter. Eliza stopped kneading. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tragedy. Fever took them, Samuel continued. 3 years ago this spring. I have been wandering ever since, trying to outrun the ghost of what I lost. Did it work? He looked at her with those blue eyes that held oceans of grief. No, it never does. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to his table, sitting across from him. She did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. She simply sat with him in his pain, letting him know he was not alone. I'm sorry, Samuel. Do not be sorry. He reached across the table and took her hand, holding it gently as if it were something precious. Meeting you is the first time in 3 years I have felt like maybe there is still something worth staying for. Autumn came to Dry Creek with cold winds and early frosts. The leaves turned gold and red before surrendering to the inevitable brown of decay. Samuel worked hard. At the Carson Ranch, earning a reputation as a reliable hand and a quiet man. But every morning, without fail, he appeared at the bakery door, hat in hand, that slow smile on his face. Their courtship was unconventional by any standard. They did not attend church socials or take chaperoned walks. Instead, they talked over flour-dusted counters and shared meals in the kitchen behind the shop. He told her about Kansas, about the way the wheat looked at sunset, about his daughter's laugh and his wife's gentle hands. She told him about her dreams of seeing the ocean, about her mother's secret recipes, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. One evening, as she was closing the shop, Samuel arrived with wildflowers clutched in his weathered hand. They were not elegant or cultivated, just simple prairie blooms, purple and yellow against the fading light. They reminded me of you, he said, and for the first time he looked almost shy, wild and beautiful and strong enough to grow where nothing else will. Eliza took the flowers, pressing them to her chest. Samuel Reed, that is perhaps the finest thing anyone has ever said to me. I have more to say. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage that always clung to him. I know I am a broken man, Eliza. I know I come with ghosts and grief and nothing much to offer. But I am asking you, give me a chance to be whole again. Give me a chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved. She looked up at him, this cowboy who had wandered into her life and slowly, gently claimed her heart. I do not need a whole man, she said softly. I just need an honest one. When he kissed her, it was tender and tentative, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through frozen ground. She tasted salt and sweetness, and something that felt remarkably like hope. Winter was brutal. That year, snow piled in drifts against the bakery windows, and the roads became impassable for days at a time. Samuel moved into the small room above the bakery, a practical arrangement that scandalized the town but kept him close when the storms raged. They fell into a rhythm. He would stoke the ovens in the early hours while she mixed and kneaded. They worked side by side, their movements synchronizing like dancers who had known each other for years. On Christmas Eve, Eliza was making sugar cookies, her mother's recipe. She had just pulled a tray from the oven when Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Smells like heaven in here, he murmured against her hair. She turned in his embrace, holding up a cookie. Taste. He bit into it, and she watched the pleasure spread across his face. Your mother knew what she was doing. She taught me everything. Eliza reached up to brush a crumb from his lip. I wish she could have met you. I wish I could have thanked her, Samuel said, for raising a woman strong enough to give a wandering fool like me a second chance at life. They decorated the cookies together, laughing as Samuel's clumsy attempts resulted in unrecognizable shapes and lopsided faces. Sugar scattered everywhere, on the counter, on the floor, on them. When Eliza reached up to brush the sugar from his chest, her hand resting against the warmth of him, Samuel forgot his words. He simply stared at her, his mouth open slightly, whatever joke he had been about to make dying on his lips. In that moment, with sugar crystals sparkling like tiny stars between her fingers and the firelight dancing across her face. He saw his entire future. "Marry me," he breathed. Eliza's hands stilled. "What? Marry me, Eliza Mae Turner." His voice was stronger now, certain. "I know I have nothing to offer but calloused hands and a heart that already loved and lost. But whatever is left of me, whatever good still exists inside this worn-out shell, it belongs to you. It has belonged to you since the moment I walked into this bakery." Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the flour that dusted her skin. "Samuel, you do not have to answer now. I know it is sudden. I know you deserve time to think, to consider what you would be taking on. I just could not hold it in anymore. I have been carrying these words for months, and they were burning a hole right through me." She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and sure and tasting of sugar and tears. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled back, disbelief and joy warring on his face. "Truly, I have been waiting my whole life for someone to see me the way you do. Not as the spinster baker or the girl who could not find a husband. Just as Eliza, just as me." She took his face in her flour-dusted hands. "You are not a worn-out shell, Samuel Reed. You are the bravest man I have ever known. It takes courage to love again after loss. It takes courage to stay when running would be easier." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and she felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs. She held him as he released years of grief, her own tears falling freely. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy," he said. "I am going to give you the ocean. I am going to give you everything. I do not need the ocean." She smiled through her tears. "I just need you, right here, in this little bakery in this forgotten town, building a life together one morning at a time." They married in spring when the prairie was ablaze with wildflowers. The ceremony was small, just a few ranch hands, the Carson family, and the preacher who had baptized Eliza as a baby. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame. He wore a new shirt she had bought him in secret, and for once, his boots were polished. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her with all the tenderness and passion of a man who understood how precious second chances were. That night, in the room above the bakery that was now truly their home, they lay tangled together, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling. "Thank you," Samuel whispered. "For what? For seeing past the broken parts, for believing I could be more than a ghost haunting my own life." Eliza traced the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "We are all broken in some way, Samuel. The trick is finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I love you, Eliza Reed, and I love you." She smiled, settling into the curve of his body. "Now get some rest. We have biscuits to bake in the morning." He laughed, the sound warm and real and everything she had ever wanted. Outside, the wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of spring and the promise of new beginnings. In a little bakery in a small town called Dry Creek, a woman who had once been lonely and a man who had once been lost held each other close and dreamed of tomorrow. Some love stories begin with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but the truest ones, the ones that last, begin with small moments. A basket of biscuits, a handful of wildflowers, sugar brushed gently from a cowboy's chest. And sometimes in those small moments, even a man who has forgotten how to hope can find the words again, the words that matter most, the words that sound like home.